Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. So, you won't believe what happened to me the other day. I was browsing Craigslist, right? Just looking for a sweet deal on a TV, when I stumbled upon this crazy cheap flat screen. I mean, this thing was a steal. I got in touch with the dude selling it, and we set up a time for me to pick it up that night. Now, I should have been a bit more cautious because the guy was super vague about the TV, but I was blinded by the awesome price. Anyway, I pull up to this house, and it's straight up nightmare material. I'm talking creepy, peeling paint, an overgrown yard, and a vibe that would make a horror movie director drool. But there I was determined to get this TV, so I gathered my courage and went up to the door. I knocked, half hoping that no one would answer, but the door slowly creaked open, and there he was, the seller. The guy looked like he hadn't been outside in years, and he was giving me these major creeper vibes. Still, I was there for a TV, so I followed him into the house. The inside was even worse than the outside. Everything looked ancient and gross, and I swear I felt like I was being watched. The guy led me to this dim room where the TV was, and that's when things got even weirder. The room was filled with all sorts of bizarre stuff, like jars with who knows what inside and creepy animal skulls. I couldn't wait to get out of there. As I checked out the TV, the guy started asking me all these personal questions. Like he wanted to know if I lived alone, if I had any pets, if I believed in ghosts and stuff. I tried to play it cool, but I was getting more and more freaked out. I just wanted to grab the TV and get out of there. So after getting the TV into my car, I raced home, my heart pounding the whole way. I couldn't help but feel like I'd barely escaped something sinister. I shook off the lingering creepiness and focused on the task at hand, setting up my new TV. Once I got home, I carefully carried the TV inside and began the process of hooking it up in my living room. I took my time, making sure all the cables were connected properly and that the TV was securely mounted on its stand. I wanted to put the whole ordeal behind me and just enjoy my new purchase, so I tried my best to get everything perfect. I even rearranged my furniture a bit to make sure the TV was the focal point of the room. As I was setting everything up, I couldn't help but feel a nagging sense of disquiet, like something was on my mind about this purchase. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination. Despite my reservations, I pressed on, determined to see the fruits of my labor. With everything finally in place, I excitedly turned the TV on. To my relief, the picture quality was fantastic, even better than I had hoped. I started flipping through the channels, getting more and more excited about my new TV. It seemed like my fears had been unfounded, and I was finally able to enjoy my bargain. But that's when I discovered the DVD still in the player. My heart skipped a beat as I considered whether or not to play it. Part of me was curious about what the previous owner had been watching, while another part of me screamed that it was a bad idea. In the end, curiosity won out and I hit play. As I mentioned earlier, the video that followed was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. The horrifying scenes play out one after another, and with each passing moment my sense of dread grew. I was completely absorbed in the disturbing images, unable to look away or even move. It was like I was trapped in some twisted nightmare, unable to wake up. When the video finally ended, I was left sitting in my dimly lit living room, completely shaken by what I had seen. My heart raced and my hands were clammy as I struggled to process the nightmare that had unfolded on my new TV screen. I couldn't escape the feeling that I'd brought something terrible into my home, and I knew I had to get rid of that DVD as soon as possible. After gathering the courage to eject the disc and throw it away, I sat there in the dark, trying to calm myself down. Every creak and groan in the house made me jump. I couldn't forget the images that had been burned into my mind. I realized then that my new TV would never be a source of enjoyment for me. It would forever be tainted by the horror I had witnessed. Now, you might be thinking that I should have just returned the TV or called the cops or something, but I didn't know what to do. I mean, would the police even take me seriously? I'd walked right into this situation, and I couldn't prove that the guy had any malicious intent. Plus, I'd already thrown the DVD away, so there went my evidence. I knew I had to get rid of the TV. I couldn't stand having it in my house, knowing where it had come from and what I had seen on that DVD. So I sold it for way less than I'd paid, of course. I didn't want to make a profit off something so messed up. I just wanted it gone. So there you have it, my creepy Craigslist adventure. I'm not sure what the lesson is here. Maybe it's that some deals are too good to be true, or maybe just to trust your gut when something feels off. All I know is that I'll never look at a flat-screen TV the same way again. And as for that house and the creepy cellar, I still think about them sometimes and wonder what other dark secrets they might be hiding. It's a mystery I never want to solve. I bet you've heard some wild stories about people buying stuff online, but let me tell you, nothing tops the experience I had. I was in the market for a new car, but I was on a tight budget, and I thought Craigslist would be my best bet. I spent days browsing through ads, hoping to find a gem on the heaps of junk. Finally, after what felt like ages, I found a listing that caught my eye. It was an older sedan, but the price was unbelievably low, and the pictures showed a car that seemed to be in pretty good shape. The seller claimed he was moving overseas and needed to sell the car quickly, which explained the low price. I decided to go for it and contacted the seller. We exchanged a few messages, and the seller seemed like a reasonable person. He agreed to meet me in a busy public parking lot in broad daylight. I figured that meeting in a crowded place would ensure my safety, as I'd heard enough horror stories about Craigslist deals going south. I took a friend along just to be extra cautious. When we arrived at the parking lot, the car was already there, and it looked even better than I expected. The seller was a middle-aged man who seemed pretty normal. He greeted us warmly and appeared to be genuinely eager to sell the car. We spent some time chatting about the vehicle's history, and he was upfront about any issues he'd had with it. He answered all my questions, and nothing seemed off or suspicious. As I inspected the car, my friend kept an eye on the seller, just in case. The car's exterior and interior looked well maintained, and the engine sounded solid. The seller even had all the paperwork in order, including maintenance records and a clean title. At this point, I was feeling pretty confident about the purchase. We wrapped up the deal, and the seller seemed relieved to have the car off his hands. He wished me luck with my new ride, and we parted ways. My friend and I couldn't believe our luck. It felt like we'd scored the deal of the century. For the first few days, everything was great. The car drove smoothly, and I was more than happy with my purchase. But then I decided it was time to give the car a thorough clean to make it feel like my own. I started with the interior, getting rid of any lingering trash and wiping down all the surfaces. After that, it was time to tackle the trunk. As I opened the trunk, I was met with a chaotic mess. There were random bits of junk like old rags, a rusty tire iron, and a tangle of bungee cords. I began sorting through the clutter, content on organizing everything neatly. That's when I found it, a gun wrapped in a dirty cloth and hidden beneath the spare tire. Panic washed over me as I realized the gravity of what I found. It wasn't just any gun. It was covered in dried brownish stains that looked eerily like blood. I was terrified, unsure of what to do next. I just bought a car from a stranger, and now I'd found a potential murder weapon in the trunk. My mind raced with thoughts on what could have happened, and the feeling in my gut was a feeling that I was in danger. After a few minutes of panicking, I knew I had to take action. I carefully placed the gun back in the trunk, closed it, and immediately drove to the nearest police station. I explained the situation to the officers, who listened intently and took the gun for further examination. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. The police informed me that the gun was, in fact, linked to a murder that had taken place a few years earlier. The case had gone cold, and the discovery of the weapon breathed new life into the investigation. The police were grateful for my cooperation, and they assured me they would do everything they could to get to the bottom of this mystery. As the investigation progressed, I had a constant consciousness of anxiety. I've been driving around with a murder weapon hidden in my trunk, completely oblivious to the danger that may have been lurking. The police kept me updated on the case, and eventually they made a shocking discovery. It turned out that the man I bought the car from was the brother of the person responsible for the murder. The seller had been trying to dispose of the evidence before anyone could connect the dots. When confronted by the police, he cracked under pressure and confessed to his role in covering up the crime. The murderer was subsequently arrested, and the family of the victim finally got the closure they've been seeking for so long. Throughout the entire ordeal, I was left in a state of disbelief. I'd gone from being thrilled about my Craigslist find to being involved in a chilling murder investigation. It was a sobering reminder of the potential dangers lurking behind seemingly innocent online transactions. In the end, I decided to sell the car. It was tainted by its dark past, and I knew I wouldn't be able to enjoy driving it knowing what had transpired. I made sure the trunk was spotless before listing it, not wanting anyone else to experience the nightmare I had gone through. You know how everyone's always looking for their big break in the job market, right? Well, that was me a while back. I was fresh out of college, armed with a degree in marketing, and I was just itching to land my dream job. After countless job applications and interviews that went nowhere, I decided to try my luck on Craigslist. Now, I know what you're thinking, Craigslist for a job. But hey, desperate times call for desperate measures. I spent hours scrolling through job listings, applying to anything that seemed even remotely relevant. And then one day I stumbled upon a post for a marketing agency that sounded too good to be true. The pay was great, the hours were flexible, and they promised ample opportunities for growth. I shot off my resume and crossed my fingers, hoping for the best. To my surprise, I got an email back almost immediately. They wanted me to come in for an interview the very next day. I was over the moon. This could be it, I thought, my ticket to the career I always wanted. The next day, I arrived at the address they provided, all dressed up and ready to impress. But when I got there, I realized something was off. The building looked old and run down, not at all like the swanky marketing agency I'd imagined. Still, I decided to give it a shot. Maybe they were just starting out and hadn't had a chance to upgrade their office space yet. As I walked inside, I was greeted by a receptionist who seemed a bit off. She barely acknowledged me and directed me to a cramped waiting area. I sat there nervously, trying to shake off the bad vibes I was getting from the place. After what felt like an eternity, a man finally came out to conduct my interview. He led me to a small, windowless room and started asking me questions about my background and experience. The questions seemed legitimate, so I tried to ignore the sketchy surroundings and focus on impressing him. Towards the end of the interview, though, things took a turn for the worse. The man asked me for my credit card information, claiming it was necessary for a background check. Now, I know this is a huge red flag, but I was so desperate for a job that I ignored my gut feeling and handed over my card details. After that, the interview wrapped up quickly, and I left the building feeling uneasy. I tried to convince myself that it was just nerves, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. When I got home, I decided to do a little research on the company, hoping to ease my concerns. Well, that's when I discovered the ugly truth. The company had absolutely no online presence, no website, no social media, nothing. Alarm bells were ringing in my head, and I immediately checked my bank account. To my horror, all my money was gone. Those scammers had completely wiped me out. I was in full-on panic mode. I called the police and reported the incident, giving them all the information I had about the company and the man who'd interviewed me. They promised to look into it, but I knew the chances of getting my money back were slim. A few days later, the police informed me that they'd visited the office building only to find it completely empty. It was clear that the scammers had packed up and vanished, leaving no trace behind. They told me that they'd seen similar cases before, where job seekers have been targeted by con artists looking to steal their identities and drain their bank accounts. I was devastated. Not only had I lost all my savings, but my dream job had turned out to be a nightmare. I felt humiliated and betrayed, and it was a hard lesson to learn. The police continued their investigation, but they warned me that it was unlikely that I'd ever see my money again. In the weeks that followed, I struggled to pick up the pieces of my life. I had to borrow money from friends and family to stay afloat, and the humiliation weighed heavily on me. I felt foolish for falling for such an obvious scam, but I knew I had to move forward. Determined not to let this setback define me, I began my job search again, this time with a newfound sense of caution. I researched every company thoroughly before applying, and I made sure to only use reputable job boards. It was a slower process, but I knew it was worth it to protect myself from further scams. Eventually, I managed to land a legitimate marketing job at a reputable company. It wasn't the glamorous position I'd initially hoped for, but it was a start. Over time, I was able to rebuild my savings and regain my footing in the professional world. I vowed never to let my guard down again, especially when it came to something as important as my career. Looking back on that experience, it's a stark reminder of how vulnerable we can be when we're desperate for a job or any opportunity that seems to offer a better life. My story serves as a warning to others, Always trust your instincts and do your research before giving anyone your personal information. The world can be a scary place, and it's up to us to protect ourselves and stay vigilant against potential dangers. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.